Hiya, I'm Lucy.
And I'm Dan.
We're SEO managers at Journey Further, and today we're going to be talking all about content strategy and all of the things that we look at when we're planning content for our clients.
So I think, from my perspective, the first sort of kind of key thing to get right is a real deep understanding of the client. So really sort of taking the time to really understand kind of the business needs and what the KPIs are. I think without that knowledge, the strategy will never be a strategy. You're kind of going in blindly. So I guess ultimately what you want to do is understand what you're trying to get out of it, why they need content on site, what sort of content they need, and what are their goals essentially, so we can then sort of make a strategy that fits into the goals. I think without that, it'll never work.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably one of the things that maybe people do, first of all, is like keyword research, which is really, really important. But I think if you've not spoken to the client and got to know their specific needs outside of just a keyword set, that can be quite dangerous from a kind of commercial point of view. So just because something has a high volume doesn't mean that actually it's the right sort of phrase that you want to be targeting for that specific client. There might be business reasons why actually it's not worth them going after that one specific kind of area. One thing though, which kind of contradicts what I've just said, is you do need to listen to the client, but sometimes actually you also need to be looking at the market as well and thinking as a user rather than, sometimes our clients are so deep in their niche that they don't maybe know all of the ways that people are searching for their products. So it's really important, I think, to look at competitors, to do like when you're doing your keyword research, just to be thinking as a normal user, because even as SEOs, I think we really make assumptions about how normal people use the internet, and often we're completely wrong. So yeah, I think using those two kind of sources. Are there any other kind of data sources that you would use for making it commercially viable?
I think from a commercial point of view, using PPC data is really important. Using kind of like non-brand keyword exports, getting that kind of data from the paid team. If available, it might not always be available, but if it is, it can really sort of give you an idea of what is commercially valuable from a keyword level, and then you can sort of tie that up to your content strategy and kind of understand, where would be the most profitable areas to work from. It may not always tie up to kind of, your overall strategy, but it does give you that sort of steer from the very outset, like these keywords are generating a lot of revenue. Can we, increase the visibility for organic at the same time to get that monetary value through, or the commercial value through there. So I think that's a really kind of good tool to use, if available, as I said. So yeah, I would use that.
Yeah, we're really lucky, I guess, at an agency like this where we do have all of those teams and we can talk to the paid social team, programmatic, paid. But even just like, within the kind of standard SEO tools, we've got Google Analytics, we've got Search Console, like there is so much data in there. That, yeah, I think usually when we're doing kind of content strategy, we will pull a lot of data and just kind of try and pivot it and look at which pages have the best conversion rate, which pages kind of, do have that best kind of sales data. Obviously that's harder when you're talking about kind of lead gen rather than e-commerce. I do love a good e-commerce site because you've just got like pure money to play with, like you know exactly how much each product makes. But with lead gen, again, you can just be looking at which pages convert, what's the kind of user journey. Yeah,
and I mean, sometimes you can always get data from the client as well, like in terms of sales, what products sell the most. If you don't have that accessible via the tools that we would use, get the data from them, or kind of get their input as much as possible to understand where the commercially valuable parts of the business are, and then tier up your strategy to promote those, push those, but also, if there are if there are areas that are underperforming, kind of, trying to build those up over time as well. So it's almost like short-term, long-term, I guess, is kind of a good sort of way to look at it on that front as well, and kind of understanding what the short-term and long-term wins will be.
How do you, when you're starting a content strategy, how do you kind of weigh up the short and long term? Like, are there any kind of tips that you have for how you would approach that when you're first kind of starting a strategy?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always about using what you've got to begin with. So from a short-term perspective, it's once you've kind of done your content audit and you kind of looked at the data and then looked at kind of what's performing well, trying to make that perform better in the short term or kind of push it as hard as possible. I think because if it's already working to a certain degree, there's value in it already. Trying to enhance that as much as possible while you're sort of building the longer term strategy will really kind of give the client confidence in you that you're working towards a bigger goal. You're trying to make the inroads where you can. And I think often you'll get the biggest returns quite quickly on those kind of quick wins. Not to say that you should ignore the longer term stuff at all, but it's more about in the first sort of few months, what's doing well, what can you make quick changes with that are going to have a big impact in the short term and generate revenue, or if revenue is not the kind of goal, traffic and awareness, just kind of using what you've got really is the key thing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Often you can be doing both at the same time. You can be having your bigger kind of strategy piece, but just, finding the top sort of 10 pages and just checking that like the page title is well optimized, which sounds like the pure basics, but like it really has an impact, a short term kind of really quick boost. And that doesn't take long to just like, send across a few optimized titles or just changing H1s, making sure that things are indexable, kind of internally linked. Those things can just be a kind of like an hour job, often. And in the meantime, you're working on that kind of bigger piece that's going to take a bit longer, but is maybe going to have a longer term kind of payoff.
Yeah, I think as well, like using like things like Salient on your pages that are doing well already, kind of to basically ensure that the content that's already there is relevant for the keywords that you want to target. Sometimes, a page might perform well, but actually it's not necessarily relevant for the keywords that you want to be pushing at that point. Yeah. So using tools like Salient to really sort of enhance content that's quite a quick job to do. It's not going to take that long, and the rewards can be quite big and quite impactful. So I'd start with that as well, and kind of enhancing that with the tools that we've got, so Salient and anything else that we can use, just to kind of give it a boost in the short term. Yeah. And then, as you said, build out your bigger strategy overall afterwards.
Yeah, and I think if you've done that kind of big commercial focused kind of piece as well, you know exactly which pages you should be looking at as well. So it's not like you're going in blind there. So, if you already know from the client and from the data that like these 10 pages drive the most traffic and are actually underperforming, then shoving them through kind of our natural language understanding tool is a really, really quick way to just, again, give them that little boost.
But I think ultimately as well, like it's very much essential to think about the long-term strategy from the very outset. Obviously have the eye on the prize, have the view that this is going to ladder up to something else. Obviously competitors who are already working in the space will have maybe had years on you to kind of develop their strategies. So we've got to be thinking ahead and looking at what they're doing to make sure that we are sort of working towards sort of venturing into their space further and, surpassing them as well. So I think, it's a short term is great for a while, but I think long term is where the benefit really kind of comes into its own, I think.
Yeah, it can be really, really tempting as SEOs, and clients often expect quick wins out of us. And they exist, but those will only work for a certain amount of time before you kind of stagnate. So yeah, it's often putting in that time, effort, resource into a longer term strategy. It will take a long time to pay off, but actually the payoff can often be a lot bigger than those like quick wins. So yeah, it's just weighing up both and just making sure that you're looking at the full kind of market, the full picture. I think, again, often it can be really tempting to do all your research, look at your competitors and see, oh, we're not actually talking about that. That's a really big opportunity. And often that is a really good opportunity. But sometimes there's kind of a reason why you've maybe not been talking about that already. And also sometimes I think we focus on the gaps, but then we're not actually looking at what you have already. Often clients have a lot of really good content that's maybe just been there for a lot of years that hasn't been updated recently. Maybe there's kind of competing content that's just kind of accidentally been added on the same topic. So I think, again, it's that long and short term thing, but sometimes an overhaul of your existing content is going to provide a lot more kind of value. Also, we're talking about pages that have a lot of historical authority. Maybe they have backlinks that are already kind of driven to those pages. And and they're already getting traffic. So we do know they perform, it's just how do we make them perform better? So again, it's maybe in a kind of quicker sense, looking at what you've got and making that better is maybe sometimes a better idea for some clients.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, sometimes you can get hung up on the gaps and you kind of assume that you should be filling all of the gaps and kind of, making sure that we're appearing everywhere. But actually, it may not be the best approach. I think sometimes it's worth thinking, should we be in this SERP space at this point? Do we offer, the customers the right experience? Do we have the right products, the right pages, the right content? And I think having that kind of awareness of what's appearing in the SERP is going to really help you kind of understand what sort of content you need to be producing. So you might be kind of tempted to create a new PDP page, a product display page, to target a certain keyword. But then if you look in the SERPs, what you'll find is a lot of like informational content and like blog articles. And actually, the way you need to approach it is what is Google showing people already? Do we have that content there? Yes, no. If we don't, do we deserve to be there as well? Do we have the right kind of offering? If we do, then what sort of content should we create? And that should be the way you approach it. It's not just kind of doing it based on your own presumptions or what you think should be there. It's about kind of understanding what people will get the most value out of and what Google's more likely to show in the SERPs, because that's going to give you the best reward as well in the future. It's going to give you the chance to appear there rather than just sort of assuming this is what people want and going with that and then kind of running with it. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think by looking at those SERP features, again, you might just find that actually we've already got a blog on this topic. It's just not been kind of like formatted well. It's not got any structured data, schema markup, that sort of stuff. And so again, it might just be a case of just, adding in, well-formatted headers so that you appear for those kind of featured snippets, or people also ask, adding FAQ schema. It can be things like that. So it doesn't always mean going back to the drawing board. Sometimes it's, actually a really small change will mean that we can be more visible even with our existing old content.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, like you mentioned as well, like cannibalization of content internally, I think that's something as well to kind of consider. Like, do you have pages that are maybe doing the same thing? Could you consolidate it? Could you improve it? Could you like delete content and redirect it, whatever needs to be done? But I think sometimes the gaps get in the way of the actual actions. I think if you think about it from a more pragmatic sense, in terms of what could we do to really sort of get into that space? Do we have the content? Do we not? Do we deserve the content? Could we have the content? It's almost about thinking about it in a much more holistic way than maybe you would think of when you do a content audit, that the gaps are there, but why are they there? You need to look at a lot of different kind of metrics and a lot of different areas, to really understand what needs to be done next. And that's kind of why content audits can be quite time consuming. It's why they're not just, a one-day job. They take they take a long time and they take effort. The effort is worth it.
Yeah, they take a long time if you do it well.
Yeah, if you do it well, it's a good thing to have, and also it's a good thing to kind of have to refer back to and kind of to really see the progress and to not just leave it. You need to work on it and kind of keep building on it over time. So yeah. Yeah,
I think cannibalization is a big one for me. I don't think I've had a single client that's come on that hasn't had some sort of confusing like user journey, because that's the thing as well, isn't it? It's like if Google can't work out which page it should be showing the user's going to get confused as well. It's going to affect, maybe your ranking position. And, Google is smart, it can work it out, but like why make it? Like if you can just really quickly consolidate 2 pages or kind of just make one set to like no index, because sometimes it's cannibalizing with like paid pages that were just created years ago and weren't set to no index, for example. So yeah, I usually spend quite a lot of time, especially with kind of those clients where they haven't had as kind of big an SEO input previously. I spend quite a lot of time just trying to really think as a user, what's the user journey to get to the specific kind of, if they're searching for a high volume keyword that we know we want to target, how do they actually get there? What are they going to land on? Is this the right page for it? And is there something else that's actually really similar that
is not very useful to the user and not very useful to Google. So yeah, I usually spend quite a lot of time looking at that. And just, to be honest, like looking if there's naff content. Like there was such a kind of time about like, I guess maybe like 7 to 10 years ago where it was just like, shove out any old blog article, you know, it'd be like, we baked a cake. And it's like, that's cool, but like it's a blog that's got like one line of copy and it's just not relevant at all to your business. Is that going to harm you necessarily? Maybe.
These days, yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we know that Google is always focusing on expertise, authority, and trust. We also know that they've just brought out like the helpful content update. If we know that Google is focusing on these things and you've got a load of content that just isn't relevant, isn't helpful, why is it there? You know, if we can really quickly, you know, 404 or 301, those kind of really useless content. I mean, we've seen good results for some of our clients when we've done that. So yeah, it's almost like a spring clean of the site. I mean, I've written those naff blogs in my time. I created the problem and I'll fix the problem. Not for current clients, I must say.
No, but in the past, it was a dumb thing because everyone was doing it, writing content just for the sake of it. And I think these days, obviously, the focus on helpful content, the focus on the focus on actually staying within your niche to a certain degree as well, and kind of offering that level of expertise, it's for the best. Because, you know, we've seen that there was an example with the helpful content update where I think it was Forbes were ranking for, was it Forbes or Wired? One of the two were ranking for sort of the top 10 tyres to buy in 2022. And that was ranking in position 2, I think, over people who actually specialised in, you know, tyre sales or cars or anything, but they were just sort of creating content that really wasn't from a space of expertise. It wasn't from someone who, maybe it was written by someone, but the actual brand wasn't known for that sort of niche. And I think it kind of makes it fairer for those who do operate in that space now to really kind of, you know, get to their customers quicker and get the information out there to, you know, make the sales they ultimately deserve above getting traffic lost in these kind of big multinational brands who just write content to get traffic, to make sales from ad revenue. It really kind of brings it back a little bit to those smaller brands, which I think is a nice way forward. And I think it may seem scary for us when we see these updates rolling out because, you know, you never know what the impact's going to be, but I think ultimately it's always going to benefit someone, and more than likely we'll be working with the people who will benefit, because our approach is to kind of maintain that kind of level of and honesty and trustworthiness within the content. It's important that we maintain that, and I think these days it's even more relevant to kind of keep that ethos alive.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things I was kind of looking at, because every time there's an update, we get the exact same blog from Google. I think it's not been updated since like 2019. There's just like, are you showing eat? And, you know, I've got to the point with some of my clients, I'm like, are we though? You know, like, you know, you're doing good work, but does our website always show that? You know, are we really doing enough of the work to show that? And so one of the things I've done recently is just go through some of those kind of guidelines, the questions that Google gives us in that kind of one block, and just really made a kind of checkbox that I can then run through kind of page by page, client by client. And it's really led to me thinking a lot more closely about actually what are the things that show expertise and authority and trust. It's like things like citing your sources. If you're saying that we're the second best in the country, where's your source?
Who's saying that?
You know, you can't just say things that aren't substantiated. It leads to a lot more work with the client, but it's kind of, you know, Google does give us a lot of data. There's the page quality guidelines as well. I know that those aren't like official ranking factors, but they're really, really interesting just to see what they're telling those kind of page experience, I can't remember the actual name, page experience people. I don't know. What they're telling those kind of actual people who are checking things manually, what they're telling them to look for. I think you can learn so much from that. So I would really recommend just going through those kind of guidelines. it's a meaty document, but I've always found it really interesting. And as I say, I've kind of put it into a kind of checklist format now.
It's very useful. I've seen it as well. It's really good. I think as well, ultimately, it comes back to that long-term kind of thing, isn't it? I think it's protecting your investment from the outset. You're not just going to create content that's going to do nothing, or even, it might perform well for a little bit, but ultimately, if you keep doing this kind of poor quality content, eventually you might be penalised, or you might kind of lose traffic that you've gained, and then you're not kind of making the same sort of revenue or the same sort of traffic figures as you did in the past, and that's not great either. So it's about kind of protecting your investment from the outset, using what Google's telling us and really kind of keeping as closely to that as possible. And yeah, I think it's the way forward ultimately.
Yeah, because I think just one thing on like how you would actually find that, I think again it can be really tempting to just look at traffic, which gives you an insight. If you've got old blogs that are getting zero sessions and haven't for the past like few years, it's a sign, but it's not necessarily a sign that it's not useful content. No. It's maybe it's an orphaned page that just can't be found very well by users or by Google. Maybe it's it's useful, but it's just like not been well optimized. Yeah. So I would argue against just like saying, oh, well, I get 0 views, just get rid. And again, that's why, content is slow. It's manual. Yeah. You can use tools that will give you an idea. We could use like Salient, we could run our kind of URLs through the tool and kind of pick out where the kind of non-relevant kind of blogs are coming, but sometimes it's just quicker to just be like, okay, I've got a list. I can see based on like the URL or just the page title, this probably isn't relevant, and just a really quick like skim versus traffic as well. So just make sure you've always got a couple of like sources of truth, and use your own intuition as well. Like
so it's a lot more holistic than you think, and I think in the past I've probably been guilty of that, where I've just sort of gone through and thought these ones aren't doing well, but then ultimately as well, what I've found more recently is that articles that we created a few years ago, right in my first kind of the first time I joined Journey Further, are now doing really well, but they haven't really done very well for a while. But trends change, like things come into popularity, and things grow in authority, so you might then have an article you created years ago that's good quality and it's doing it has a potential to do well, that maybe hasn't done well for ages, and then suddenly something in the news comes out, or something, a trend emerges, like different, furniture styles or whatever, and then your article gets bumped up, and that's kind of what you want to look for. You want to kind of maintain that level of understanding that it's not just about keywords or about the now, it's about, is this article going to be useful to my customers at some point? Do I think this is written in a way that's going to really speak to them, give them the information they want, and not just kind of be there just to kind of get quick traffic? Yeah. So having that kind of foresight and that kind of like long-term awareness can really kind of pay off. So definitely don't remove all the content if it's not doing well right now.
That's what we do. That's what we say. Get rid. We'll do really well.
Yeah. I mean, everyone else can do that, yeah, but we won't do that. I think that's really important. I think a lot of people were saying that with helpful content update to kind of get rid of anything underperforming, and actually do not do that, because that's going to reduce the bulk of content you've got. If you've built up a lot of content over time, it will work in your favour that you've got a lot of authority, a lot of expertise held in these articles. So getting rid of that is going to really hinder performance and going to prevent you from growing. Yeah. So yeah, hold tight and judge it based on the EAT guidelines and the merits and your own understanding of, is this going to be useful? Even ask customers if it's useful. Find out from them, is this going to be useful to you? And use those as gauges rather than just traffic and nothing else.
We had like a work experience person come in, and it was really, really interesting to talk to someone who's not in SEO at all, who's, quite young, still at school, and just finding out actually how she interacts with the internet, how her mum interacts with the internet. Again, I think we get so stuck on data and how we think normal humans exist. We are not normal humans. Like, if there's one thing about SEO, we're not normal users. So I think just, listening to that, her example was like, if she wanted to find out how to clean a hardwood floor, which I mean, maybe she wouldn't want to do that because she's young and cool, but if she did, there's no way she would have read an article.
No.
You know, she's clicking on the first video result, her mum's clicking on the first video result. People don't have time to read articles when they could just be told in a really clear step-by-step video where you can see the physical movements you need to make, you know. And I think that's somewhere where we need to jump on that, because it's not going to go away in my mind. Like,
yeah, I agree. I think like we've had experience with working with like the influencer team here, where we've sort of created video content. I think one of the examples we had for Time of Sleep was a video around how to clean your headboards, and that was on TikTok. So that was put on TikTok, working with an influencer. And obviously that's not SEO at all, but the traction it got and the kind of level of engagement it got was well beyond anything that we've ever created from like an article perspective. So it's almost like this is where people are searching for these sort of tips and tricks and these sort of different style of content pieces. So how do we then sort of jump on that from an organic perspective? Obviously there's certain barriers to that at the moment with like TikTok and stuff. They're more separate. You don't really have the same sort of, they don't get the same sort of link back. They don't get the same sort of value of linking back from a video to your website. But I think what we can do is use these tools to understand what the trends are and try and bring that to the website, or try and kind of create our own content that, you know, matches that. So you can look for kind of, you know, what keywords people are searching for, what sort of trends are appearing. These things are really useful to kind of understand where things are moving. And even then, you know, if you do spot that a lot of people are jumping on a piece around how to clean your headboard, and you've got an article already on site around that, it may be that the two can marry together. So you can update your article, you can improve it, you can link to the TikTok video from your website and get the engagement there from, you know, what you've already got. It's almost like using it to the best of our ability and kind of making sure that we're kind of paying attention to the changing demands and changing what's happening.
I see that whole space as being very like blurred now. Like, it's not strictly SEO, but it's also not strictly just influence or just PR. We've got a client at the moment where we're doing SEO, PR and influencer, and we have like weekly syncs where we're just making sure that we're actually all using that same data, that we're sharing those insights. I found that, you know, you might not get a link straight from TikTok to your website or straight from like that video, but what works really well for PR is when they're doing a kind of a story that they go out to the press with, having those videos, having that TikTok insight in that press release, that gets them a link, which then gets us a link. So it's all interlinked, pun intended, but I think it's thinking bigger. It's thinking bigger than just we're the SEOs, we're weird little nerds who are just writing like blog content. Like, no, we're talking to all of these teams and we're gaining that insight. We're looking at the market, we're looking at trends. And I mean, I think that's really exciting. Like, it's not stale, it's new. It's difficult if, you know, you've got a client who doesn't maybe have as much resource, but there's always things you can do. And often you'll find they already have video content. You know, they have it buried on their site somewhere, or, you know, I'll go on pages and I won't even realize there's a video there because it's not obvious to a user, and you haven't told Google that there's a video there. You're not using, you know, video markup. So again, just going over what you already have and seeing whether you can repurpose that. You know, maybe you've got like TV adverts that are on at the moment. Are you making the most out of that on site? Are you making the most out of that in the SERP space for like brand awareness? Can you use that for your paid social ads? Like, it is all connected. And I think that's the joy of working at a place like this, is that not only do we have all of these teams, but like they're all really, really good and nice people. So it's like, it's nice to kind of share those insights. And I really enjoy working on those kind of cross-channel clients, because that's how the internet works now. Like, there is not just one kind of route to success. We all kind of have to work together to please Papa Google.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, that's like very true. I think we've had it before as well, actually, with Time Sleep, again, another example, but with that headboard piece, the cleaning one, PR actually used that a lot in their press releases, because what it showed the reporters or whoever's writing the publications was that actually people were interested in that top content, and having that kind of to back up the story that we went out with, then allowed us to get more links. And the links we got were actually really good. And we had some followed links as well, which is, very, very good in this industry and in this day and age where a lot of them are now affiliates and everything else. But got some followed links that really, really impacted the rankings. And it really demonstrated the value in having that kind of cross-channel collaboration and really kind of a key understanding of what we were trying to do and why we were doing it. And also as well, the assets that we created weren't expensive. Like, I think the joy nowadays with TikTok and things like, even YouTube or anything, you don't have to have big production value. You can make something quite quick, quite easy, but really speak to customers and speak to people who are interested in, either your brand or what you're offering or what you've got expertise in. And it can be quite cheap. It can be really kind of off the cuff, but it kind of gives you the access to people in a new avenue. And I think sometimes maybe we think about video content in a way that's going to be, jazz hands, etc. But actually, it can be quite mundane, quite dry, really. But it just gives people instruction. It gives people really clear guidance. And I think if you can tap into that, the world is your oyster really with it. And I think it really levels up your content strategy. Ultimately, it comes back to that. It comes back to kind of that initial content strategy kind of blurs out. Then it kind of becomes something bigger. It becomes a brand building piece. It becomes your PR activity. It becomes everything. So that kind of is where I see the future with that stuff. I think it can really sort of help. And I think as well, as obviously you mentioned the SERPs earlier as well, like the SERPs now are full of video content. You've got TikTok videos, Facebook videos, YouTube videos, all appearing. So having the kind of view and the awareness of what's kind of appearing there can then help you kind of go to your influence team or your PR team and say, there's a lot of this video content here. Could we do something? This is getting traction. Google's pulling the videos into the SERPs. We can work together to create some content that we can put on site, we can put on TikTok, put out to the press, and really kind of level up your content strategy and what you're trying to do, and ultimately get the gains that you want, whether it's authority or sales through influencers or ranking increases through authority. It all ties together nicely. And also assets for paid social as well. There's always a nice kind of addition. You can use those quite easily.
Because I think it can be quite like scary at the moment because the current state of the world is like scary. Search trends are down for a lot of industries. Google is reducing the amount of organic SERP space in the kind of traditional sense. But I think that all the more reason to be just trying to take advantage of what is there, and just thinking outside of the box when it comes to, okay, well, if search trends are down, okay, fine, but like, how can we get new traffic? How can we get a different demographic? How can we, get people to the site in a like less direct way? There is still so much opportunity, but it can be a bit kind of scary at the moment. So that's where I'm like, talk to your colleagues, talk to your clients, be kind of honest about the state of the SERPs, There's no point kind of sugarcoating it. It is hard. It's harder to do SEO than it used to be, but it's also more interesting.
Well, and rewarding as well. I think when you get the gains and you get that kind of the win, you put a lot of work into it. It's never a sort of an easy task really to kind of get things over the line, whether that's on-page changes or content created. It does take time, but the rewards can be really great. And I think kind of nowadays you have to work for your money like a lot more than maybe in the past where you could buy links or you could create some really poor quality content that kind of ranked for something that you weren't even relevant for. It requires a lot more thought, a lot more time, but it's ultimately going to benefit the clients because the people that come to the website for that content or know your brand through any video content you've created or etc., they are the ones that are more likely going to invest in your company. They're going to buy from you. They're going to engage with the content. They're going to be there for what you're offering, essentially. They're not just there by accident. It's about getting the target traffic, isn't it? It's about making sure that we're going after the right people and really offering our customers or clients or whoever it is the right sort of content on site. So it's good.
I think one of the kind of difficulties when there is so much to think about and so many things that you're looking at and it's such a long strategy. I think again one of the things that probably like personally speaking I could do a lot better is making sure that I'm reporting in the right way on the changes that we're making. I think, again, when you're doing a huge content strategy, sometimes you get things done, but you're on to the next thing, and you kind of making sure that you have some sort of like record of everything that's been changed, some sort of benchmarking system, a kind of dashboard, that means that you can look back and be like, oh, actually, that set of pages that I set live 6 months ago is now performing because it can take that long. But also just making sure that the clients are aware of the work that you're putting in and the benefits it's having. That's something I not that good at, and I often come like every 3 months I'll check and be like, oh damn, I'm doing well. Yeah. But you know, it would be helpful to kind of keep on top of that a little bit more.
I think like reporting, it does take time as well. I think obviously setting up the dashboards or creating the kind of benchmarking that we want to create, it takes time, and it takes time to really sort of keep refreshing it. Obviously we do have kind of capabilities to create dashboards that automatically update. But equally, if you're creating new content, you need to kind of feed that into the dashboard as well. So it is time intensive as well. But I think ultimately the main benefit is understanding what's working well, what isn't working well, and whether we need to kind of make changes to the strategy. Yeah. I think one thing that I would definitely say to people is don't get cocky with your strategy in the sense that you think it's going to always work. Yeah. Sometimes things change, and you need to kind of be realistic and say, actually, what we thought hasn't worked out. Here's why, here's the learnings, and then take those forward. But having a really clear reporting system or a way to kind of look back at kind of what you've done will give you those insights. Yeah. And I think maybe that's what people don't do often enough, is really spend time thinking, actually, is this working? I know it's hard sometimes because sometimes things take a while to really kind of gain traction, or, you know, it may not be the right time for content to appear in the SERPs, or the search trend might be down. But I guess if you followed all the steps from the outset and you've said, right, this content is relevant to us, follows EAT guidelines, it's well linked to our site, the technical elements are there, the schema's there if applicable, and all that's there, there's no reason why this content shouldn't appear when it needs to. If you're confident in that, then, you know, it's worth kind of keeping an eye on it. But if you think that maybe you've strayed from those guidelines, or you think actually what I thought isn't what people want, or I've done more research and I found actually this is never going to work for us, then change it up, and don't be afraid to say that to clients and be like, actually, I was not wrong, but I was the assumptions we made based on the data weren't correct, and things have changed, things have moved on. Nowadays, look at the world, it changes every bloody week, so, you know. And
I think that can be scary, especially for people maybe that are just starting out in SEO, that or where clients, you know, they want you to have all the answers. But I mean, I've found like the more honest and like open you are and transparent, like the clients respect that. They want to see results. If your analysis has shown that actually we need to pivot, it's not worked, we've given it a good shot, they'll respect that you're coming to them and not just carrying on until they notice. Do you know what I mean?
Don't flog a dead horse, no.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's why reporting is really important, to just keep track on that yourself. Yeah. And don't come to the point where like you've just completed the strategy 100%, yeah. And then you're like, where are the results? Like
it's never complete as well.
It's never ever over.
No, I think that's the thing with like SEO and content strategies. It's always developing. Like I think maybe there's an assumption that you kind of do one and then you finish that one, start another one. It always should be developing. You should always be thinking ahead and thinking, actually, I've got this schedule for next month. Do I still want to be doing this? Has something changed? Have I got the right insight to be allowing myself the time to really reflect on it and really understand whether I need to be pivoting at the right time or the right moment? And I think it's never a done job. Our jobs never finish. We don't ever end.
And is content the answer? You know, maybe it's tech that's holding you back. Maybe it's links. Maybe it's brand awareness.
Maybe the brand's done something that has skewed things. You never know. These things need to be considered, and that's why a holistic approach is the way forward with it all. I hope you found that useful. If you'd like to connect with us on LinkedIn or Twitter, please find the links below, and hopefully speak to you soon.